Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're checking out the second last episode of Series 3 and the second episode in the three-part finale, The Sound of Drums. We've pivoted from a post-apocalyptic scenario to a political thriller.
And sort of a pre-apocalyptic scenario when you think about it.
And a pre-apocalypse, which is, to be fair, what most political thrillers are.
Yeah.
Case in point, the 2024 presidential election.
Anyway,
this episode is going to be uploaded fairly close to the inauguration, so.
Oh boy.
If I've got my math right, I think that the audience, will have previously heard our Joy to the World review, because I think that based on the timeline of when we upload and record, we'll have done that in that gap between the previous episode and this one.
Does that premiere on Christmas Day in the UK?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But well, from the past, how was it? It was good, probably. Great. Thank you for answering. Let's get back on track though. Your regularly scheduled season 3 watch back. Utopia last week, or 3 weeks ago, rather. We mentioned was pretty okay as like a standalone piece, a pretty great standalone piece actually, not like too solid as like a part 1, but like does a decent job of intrigue and build and setup. It's building up largely to this, which is like the Master's proper introduction to the revival era. This is the Master Power Hour, where we get to see him in his element. He's had 18 months without the Doctor to do whatever the hell he wants. He's achieved a level of success that we've never seen from this character in the past. I.e., he's now basically gotten what he wants. He's the Master of Great Britain. He's lording it over.
Soon the world.
Soon the world. Soon the universe, actually. And he's, he's fully. For ages now, all he's wanted is power over the people he looks down upon, and now he's got it, and we get to see what he does with it, and it's actually a pretty interesting way to take the character in this many people's first impression of the character.
Yeah. I mean, and you say that this is a political thriller, and yeah, it is. But it's funny in that it's kind of subversive, because a lot of, political thrillers we'd be seeing, the process of government and the way populist figures tend to ingratiate themselves into the political process. We don't see much of that here, by which I mean not just that we don't see the 18 months leading up to this, but the Master doesn't do too many political machinations, and the reason for that is because he has enough power to not have to give a shit, and it's kind of great watching that. The fact that he just sits there, says to the rest of his politicians, "Fuck you," and then gasses them all, and sits there with that ridiculous grin and the thumbs up while they're all dying. It's just, it's funny, obviously, but it's so great for characterization, because it's a great way to introduce this character, a very bold way to introduce this character. You definitely get a sense of how he views not just authority generally, but particularly human authority. Like, you really, in his snideness and his snarkiness, you can feel that contempt for, supposedly lesser beings. And, but it also, it's a good expansion on who this character is previously, because even though I would say John Sim is the most, certainly up to this point, the most sort of humorous, tricksterish sort of master, all of the core qualities that make up the Master are still here. They're just manifesting in a new way, which is great, because I think that's what you want with a new regeneration. So yeah, it's quite exciting.
It's definitely a different take on the character. It's not nearly as like gentlemanly as other depictions have been in the past. There are bits of it here and there,
Yeah.
But like there are enough little bits thrown in here and there that make you go, "Oh, okay, this is the same character." Like there's when it's a minor moment, but he refers to on the TV broadcast, he refers to uh he says, "Peoples of the earth, please attend carefully." And he had a previous call for attention of the peoples of the universe in Legopolis.
Hmm.
So that is like one of a couple of things that is like a
Hmm.
nice little like dialogue affectation that just for a classic fan would make you click and go, okay, it's a bit different, but it's still the same character. And
Yeah,
also we
yeah,
get
for
the
sure.
Master watching Teletubbies in a callback to the Sea Devils when he was watching the Clangers.
I didn't pick up on that, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, you've mentioned that it's like we don't get like the Masters. We don't see the Masters rise to power here. We just get
hmm,
the um the fallout of his hypnotic control of the people, which was referenced a couple of times in this episode.
hmm,
Taken to its maximum on the sliding scale in the form of the Archangel Network. How he's basically managed to thought control the populace into liking him and not really having
hmm.
to do much in the campaigning. We get to see the fallout of all of that. And it's such a great cold open because just watching the TARDIS team realize what's going on, like even from the very beginning, it just puts a pit right in your stomach.
Yep.
And you're just left going, oh shit, how the fuck are we gonna get out of this?
Yeah, it's a very tense episode, and it works really well with tension because I think it really is the case that every time it escalates, you think, where the fuck are we going to go from here? And then somehow it manages to still surprise you. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
because, I mean, especially if you're a classic fan, because you know who the Master is, but even if you don't, the way his characterization is constructed, he's such a trickster and is so capable of playing 4D chess, so that even weird small things that don't seem to make sense, like the fact that there's sticks of dynamite on the back of Martha's TV, that's so weird, but it feels completely in line, because I can imagine that um, the Master knew that the Doctor would be able to get himself and his companions out of that house in time. He's just doing it to fuck with the Doctor, which is just so funny. It's so disturbing. It's just really, it's just great, really.
Well, it's also like little bit, and it was something that I only noticed on this watch through. Um, when he gasses his cabinet to death.
Hmm.
Um, when you first watch it, you're like, okay, that's just like that's just a scene to throw in there to like demonstrate that the Master has no regard for human life. He doesn't really
Hmm.
like have a big reason to kill these people who are supposedly loyal to him. But then later on, and it's not even drawn attention to, it's like literally in the bottom corner of the frame, in the scene where the Master tells the Doctor that he, Martha, and Jack are public enemies 1, 2, and 3.
Hmm.
You can see in the bottom corner of like literally one shot that lasts about 2 seconds. The news report is showing a picture of one of the cabinet members, and it's literally right after they've reported on the public enemy status. And I noticed it this time, and I went, "Oh, crap! The Master is framing these three for the deaths of the cabinet. That's why they're public enemies."
Hmm.
And I noticed that, and I
Yeah,
went,
that makes
"God
sense.
damn, that's they didn't even highlight that. They just it's
Hmm.
literally I've watched this episode maybe 5, 6 times. I only noticed it this once, and I saw it, and I went,
Hmm.
"Holy shit!" That just clicked in my head. It was a
Yeah.
great moment.
Yeah. He he's sort of planned all of this so much that he can afford to just sort of say fuck it at certain moments, because he's clearly the Master's having a lot of fun here. And
Yeah,
part of that, obviously, is John Sims' marvelous performance. He's clearly enjoying it, but there's something deeper there. As you say, he's got this very disturbing contempt for basically kind of all life. Um, but I'm honestly reminded a little bit of the Deadly Assassin, how he, you know, comes back to Gallifrey on basically kind of on his last legs, because he's at the end of his final regeneration, and he tries to take control of Rassilon Star and the Eye of Harmony, almost as a way just to spite Time Lord Society. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, the Time Lords suck, but
Yeah.
there's such a
And they definitely wouldn't lie.
no, of course not. But there's such a sort of a pettiness and a contempt there, that it again, like, it's totally in line with the Master, but it's just a good way of giving a deeper reason to all this weird, nutty behavior, because it looks like just really funny and wacky and nonsense on a certain, like, on a surface level. But when you sort of start to dig deeper, his characterization is done in a really good way.
Mm.
And I think the black humor of the situation is a key part of that. Not only with things like the ending with "Here Come the Drums," as sort of delightfully nauseating as that scene is, but even small things which I didn't quite notice until a second watch. So, for example, when you see the TV endorsements, I think I've mentioned this before, but you've got some boy band. I don't know who they are. Maybe they were a real boy
McFly,
band that
yeah.
was famous.
Yeah, their
Sorry,
name's McFly.
okay, good God. You've
Yeah,
got them,
they're
but
called
then
McFly.
you've
Yep.
got Sharon Osbourne and
Yep.
Anne Widdecombe. And
Mm-hmm.
here's the reason why I find that funny and why it's so useful. So I don't know exactly what Sharon Osbourne's politics are, but I can imagine she's a fairly left-wing type. I mean, she's married to Ozzy Osbourne, for goodness sake. Who, lead singer of Black Sabbath, smoked a lot of weed in the 70s from what we've heard. So I can imagine she's probably fairly fairly left-leaning. Anne Widdecombe, I'm pretty sure at the time, was a Conservative MP, and now she's part of the Reform UK party, which I think is currently being led by Nigel Farage. So that shows you where her loyalties lie. Now, the reason why that's funny is because obviously the weird contrast and getting Anne Widdecombe to stand up in front of a camera next to the Master and say, "Yes, I think Harold Saxon is a good plan for the future, and he's handsome too." Yeah. Not only is that funny, but it works because it shows that the Master is using his, hypnotic powers to reach all people, regardless of their stance in the political spectrum, right? It shows that, and then this is, emphasized later on, that no one's actually listening to his policies because they can't, because they're just being hypnotized to vote for him. No one actually cares. This is just everybody is getting swept up in this, which is, it's just great. I think, like, what could have been, just a simple moment of comedy, which we've seen before. I mean, it reminds me of all the talk shows, all the ghost characters in
Yeah.
Army of Ghosts. But it's more than that. There's real world building and characterization here, which is really, I think, quite exciting.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of there's a lot to say about a lot of that.
A lot to
Political
unpack.
stuff. Yeah, a lot to unpack. Putting the politics aside for a second. I do like the like using the different political leanings of those people as a way of like subtly working in there's something sort of off about Harold
Yeah, for
Saxon's
sure.
campaign before
Yep.
even Martha brings up, I didn't really know what I was gonna vote for him for. I just knew I was gonna vote for him. I just knew I liked him.
Yep.
And that having that be a lead in to and it's a really small scene to focus on, but when the Doctor makes the perception filters on the TARDIS keys and we get the demonstration of how the perception filters work. And it's really effective showing like Martha's viewpoint where she can see the Doctor but he's not the focus. And it's such a great way of like showing, because we've heard perception filter been thrown around for ages in Doctor Who,
Yep.
like it's sort of like a thing where you throw out the words and you're like, oh, okay, it's just sci-fi buzzword for no one sees it. But then actually having this explanation in this episode, it's a really nice way of like really like solidifying the concept as like a living, breathing part of this larger world, as like expanding it from just buzzwords essentially.
Yep.
Yeah, and having that be a huge factor in the Master's plan, working it into his hypnotic suggestion, working it into the fall of Harriet Jones being his rise to power, would have happened around 18 months prior to the Master arriving,
Yep.
so it lines up perfectly there.
Yep.
Again, like the stuff I've pointed out in the past, where the Russell T Davies being really, really excellent at weaving unrelated plot points together, and it's on.
Yep.
So it's on Showcase here. It'll be on full force in the next season's finale, but
Yeah,
that's
for
the
sure.
time.
Also, a small thing, but the bit where the Doctor puts on the key, and we literally see from Martha's perspective. Even that's done really well, because they could have maybe tried to do some weird, bit of special effects to demonstrate this perception filter, but it's not. It's literally just the camera moving to the left. But that still makes so much sense, right?
Yeah,
Like
and
it
I also
it does
like
it so well.
yeah, and when the Doctor waves his hand and says hello, like the sharp adjustment back to him in middle frame before like shifting left again is a great way of it's like a great way of subtly showcasing. Okay, so you can still be seen and observed if you draw attention to yourself.
Yeah, but
Which and that
you're not
fully
innately drawing attention to yourself.
yeah, but that also cements like for the rest of the episode. Okay, so this is what they're gonna have to try and do. They're gonna have to try and not stand out too much.
Yeah, for sure.
You
Very
mentioned the
effective.
Time Lords. You mentioned the Time Lords briefly, and this is the first time in Revival Who that we get a decent look at Gallifrey or Time Lord society. It's also the first time we hear Murray Gold's "This is Gallifrey," which is beautiful. It's one of his best pieces of music he ever composed. We'll hear it again when he dies next episode.
Does it get used fairly frequently in the Moffat era? I feel like it.
It gets used every now
when
and
they're
then.
on Gallifrey and we see flashbacks to it.
The most notable use I can remember is this is going to be the episode "The Name of the Doctor," which is the one right before the 50th anniversary. You remember that one? How there's a couple of sequences where we see all the Claras jumping around the Doctor's timeline, but it begins with the Doctor stealing the TARDIS from Gallifrey. Right before we see the big glass dome, it's a real triumphant like. And that's my main thing that I remember that theme from, like in the Moffat era. I'm sure it pops up every now and then. It's probably in Hellbent, but I haven't watched that episode back in years for good reason. It's in The End of Time later on. I don't think it would have been in the Chibnall era when in the few times we go to Gallifrey. I don't think that they used any recurring motifs from the Murray Gold.
Well, I mean, Murray Gold wasn't even a part of it, so I can't imagine they would have.
I mean, there's heaps of precedent in media for musical artists like resampling motifs from previous musical artists.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's also the first time we've really heard properly talking about Gallifrey to any certain extent. Like he talks to Martha about it in Gridlock, but we don't hear that conversation fully. The episode ends on it. Here we see the glass dome, we see a Gallifreyan or a time big old neck piece robes, and we see a flashback of the Master as a kid. This is obviously in the new timeline where during the Time War, Rassilon puts the Rhythm of Four in the Master's head, which incidentally, contrary to popular belief, not inspired by the Doctor Who theme tune. It was apparently inspired by an alarm clock that Russell T Davies had at one point.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, but it is great that in that one like 30-second shot of the untempered schism, which again, like learning more about Time Lord lore, always a good thing. Heaps of like references in this. For example, like obviously there's the seal of Rassilon on a bunch of clothing, but I don't know if you noticed this. The what the Master is wearing in that scene as a kid, it is incredibly reminiscent of the original attire of the Time Lords from the War Games.
Yeah, that would make sense. I think think the robes they wore, there was like some of them had like a white stripe in the middle, but yes, it is similar. It also it feels kind of similar to some of the outfits that um the Delgado Master wore in
Yeah,
with
there are
the
a few
third
callbacks to
Doctor.
that. Yeah,
Yeah. Um. Still, yeah, quite interesting.
yeah. Um, yeah. Like I said, it's the most we've heard about Gallifrey in 3 years of the show.
Mm, mm,
It's a great moment where a new audience gets to see the mighty glass dome for the first time.
mm,
And then like it's such like a subtle transition between like the Doctor talking about the beauty of the planet and the Citadel and all that, and then like a hard transition into holy shit, they're showing 8-year-olds the raw power of time itself, and they think that's
mm,
a good idea.
mm,
It's a really great conversation. Just this
mm,
to show like the way the Doctor remembers people. Yeah, he's able to look back on his civilization with Rose when he wants, but then he takes them off to criticize them in a heartbeat. It's great.
mm. Yeah, it's very effective. Um, there's there's a conflict there.
And there's also he'll address this again in the end of time when he tells Wilf, "There's a way that I choose to remember the Time Lords, and then there's who they ended up being."
Mm,
And this sort of fits that really well as well. Something I wanted to highlight, and it's not necessarily something about this episode in general, but it is something about the show as a whole. Um, and it's something about Doctor Who that really shouldn't work, and that's Gallifreyan Time Lord Society. Now, there are a
mm,
few like discrepancies here and there between like what's a Time Lord, what's a Gallifreyan, all
mm,
that stuff. But given that they essentially built the Doctor's origins out of nothing on purpose to make the Doctor this really mysterious, enigmatic figure who we knew nothing about, and then like over 26 years of classic Who, we occasionally get a Gallifrey episode, Time Lord episode to flesh it out a bit more. Um, so like literally we and by extension the writers got spoon-fed information about Time Lords and Gallifrey as the series went on, and it doesn't
mm.
feel that way now for some reason. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's really really weird how like every now and then like the Doctor wasn't meant to be an alien in the first place, then regeneration was never supposed to be, then it's all Time Lords. I think Patrick Troughton in the War Games was meant to say, "Oh, they're the leaders of my people" or whatever, but he changed
Mm,
it on the fly to no, they're my people to make it a bit more easy to follow, I guess.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, so we get that, then we get the Master throughout this huge running thing. We get Gallifrey, we get the regeneration limit, we get like episodes showing how Time Lord Society works, how the Citadel works,
Mm.
like struggles with all that stuff. It shouldn't
And Omega and people
work.
like that, and
Omega,
Rassilon.
Rassilon, all this stuff, like, and now we get to 61 years later, and Gallifrey feels like even though like we barely see it, whenever we do see it, whenever we hear about it, it feels like a fully realized, fleshed out, planned civilization. Something that took a lot of thought, something that a lot of imagination as well. But then like
Mm,
but then you sit back and you think about how it was created, where literally drip by drip they inserted information over like 10, 20, 50 years.
mm.
It shouldn't work as well as it does. It should not be as iconic a thing as it is.
Well, I think in a way the fact that it's been building up for so long is kind of the key to it, because they've had the time to, like, all the writers throughout the show have had the time to sort of work out all the ideas, sort of behind the scenes, even as early as the Three Doctors. Right, this is 10 years into the show. Um, Given that it wasn't, an idea from the beginning, that story they feel really fleshed out.
And even in this story, when they're not present, we do get their like breathtaking arrogance on full display. When
Mm,
we learn that they resurrected the Master to be a perfect soldier in a time war,
mm,
it's like they know who the Master is. They did not like if they for a second thought they could control him if he would not like maybe they probably wouldn't have predicted he would just flat out run away. But like that all comes out in that conversation between the Doctor and the Master about halfway through the episode. It's the first time that the two
Mm.
characters have had a proper conversation since 1996.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's so great. It's so weirdly
yeah.
innocuous. It's a phone.
Hmm.
It's a piece of human tech, which undoubtedly to the Time Lords would be incredibly primitive. It's just it's so great in how understated it is, and the fact that
Yeah.
the Doctor and the Master are so calm, but you can obviously feel the tension. It's very
Mm.
palpable, which is really great.
It's like it's the kind of conversation like they say one word each. Um, the Master says Doctor, the Doctor says Master. With those two words alone, you know what their dynamic has been. You understand the relationship between the two.
Hmm.
You just get it. You understand it. It's brilliant acting by David and John. Um,
Yeah.
and in that scene, incidentally, they were actually on the phone to each other. I don't know if they filmed the scenes at the same time, but they weren't just like, oh, I'll do my
Hmm.
line, I'll leave a gap for you to do your thing, then
Hmm.
I'll do my next line. Like they were actually talking to each other, which I think helps the performances considerably, obviously, and
Hmm.
the chemistry as well, because like they only have one scene physically in the same room in the
Yeah.
entire story, and it's right at the end on the Valiant.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
even then, the
again,
Doctor's just sort of standing in the background, but most of it.
yeah, but
Um.
like I said, there's two scenes where they interact, two scenes between the Doctor and the Master. It's a relationship that's been built up over like 40 years of the show, and
Hmm.
like the chemistry's on point. You
Yeah.
buy it, you instantly buy it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of combination of the writing and, of course, the fantastic performances. You like it, and like the quality of it being, friends to enemies.
Yeah.
Um, that there's a clearly a history here, and it's very specific to them. Like I
Mm.
couldn't imagine the Doctor talking to Davros like this, for example. It's
Oh
just
no.
a different relationship there. But here, between the two of them, there's a weird respect. Um, even a like you get the feeling that that friendship is there, and obviously that plays into the ending of the next episode.
Yeah.
But there's it even in that simple conversation, as you sort of say, there's a lot of layers, and
Mm.
that's hard to do. Um, there's more. I mean, like bringing back a villain like this.
One of my favorite moments from that conversation is just like when the master's like sort of like goading the Doctor on his role and ending. He's like, "You must have felt like a god," when the Doctor
Mm,
describes having to end the Time War, and that's
mm,
such it's perfect because it's the Master, taking a shot at the Doctor for like something that he knows the Doctor feels massive guilt over, which is
yeah,
great, but it's also the Master's god complex on full display.
yeah. I mean, when he says that, and also when he says, you chose your name too, the Doctor, the one who heals people, how sanctimonious. There's, it feels like projection, which is kind of
Mm.
great. And even if the Master is self-aware enough to realize it's projection, it still works. Um,
Yeah.
this is just the flavor of their relationship. Um, you really feel that these characters have lived fully fleshed out lives, but fully fleshed out lives with each other. So
Mm.
that even if you don't know who the Master is, if this is your first Master episode, it's a really good introduction because you get the impression of who the Master is, but also that crucial relationship with the Doctor. It's just so well done. I want to go back just very briefly to your point about the arrogance of the Time Lords and how they
Yeah,
ever
sure.
thought they could, in a way, tame the Master. It I imagine that the reason they did that was because they were really desperate, because they were facing like an end of the universe situation. They felt like they didn't have any other choice.
Well, sure, yeah.
But still, you're right. If they thought, like, even if they thought, oh, well, we would rather there be a potential threat to the universe in years to come that maybe someone like the Doctor can sort out, We'd rather that than a literal end of the universe scenario. Was still very foolish to think, oh yeah, if we just offer him in like another regeneration, nothing bad's gonna happen there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that they've done that before. They've tried offering the Master new regenerations to get him to do what they want, and he hasn't done it.
Yeah, no, he's always basically said "fuck you."
Yeah.
It's kind of one of the interesting things that the Doctor and the Master have in common, which is they have a considerable amount of contempt for their own society, for again, fairly good reason.
Yeah. The low-key MVP of the episode is Martha's dad. It's such a great moment, given a bunch of the build-up we've had with, like, Martha's mom having a mistrust of the Doctor, but then, like, in the moment, her dad realizing, wait a second, this doesn't seem right. And it's another moment where I'm like, yeah, you know what? I just don't think that this Francine Jones character is as sympathetically written as Russell wanted, because she's in a room with and she's in a situation as well where there are several, like, they're tapping into their daughter's phone calls. There are government spies everywhere. There are police holding machine guns, and she still has the nerve to say she's not safe with the Doctor, while still saying, "Hey Martha, come round here. Come round. Come over here." There, like, the machine guns, Francine. Come on.
We're having a fun little reunion, and we're not being physically threatened at all. Peachy
No,
keen, your dad and
we
I are
said,
getting back together.
yeah, oh Jesus, and we said emotional manipulation right there. And we said in the I forget if it was Lazarus Experiment or 42. We said, okay, maybe it's an Archangel Network thing, but it clearly isn't, because, like, Martha's dad is, like, pretty quick to blame the Saxon voters for the situation. Like, he recognizes that Saxon's not a good dude.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like, because my go-to excuse for that would be, oh yeah, it's probably an Archangel thing. But even like, let's say, for example, that Martha's family is a bit more resistant to the Archangel manipulation for some reason. Maybe it's because they've been, around the Doctor, and there's some sort of
I don't
weird
think it's
timey-wimey.
well, look, I don't think it's anything specific as that, because, like, just before you finish this point,
Yeah,
Archangel
yeah,
Network is built on the perception filter, and the whole point of the perception filter is don't stand out, and it will work on you. So if all you're getting from the perception filter thing is believe in Saxon, then you probably will. But if you get told, hey, for Harold Saxon, can you please try and entrap your daughter for us?
at
I think
gunpoint.
the perception at gunpoint. I don't think the perception filter would
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
in that kind of a situation.
Would you say
especially because
no, yeah, go.
later on live TV, when we see Saxon lead the charge on the president being killed, the people watching TV aren't like, oh, good for him. Good for him. They're immediately shocked and appalled.
Yeah, that
by
the U.S.
situation.
president, the most powerful leader in the world,
the spell breaks instantly in that situation. So it must be the kind of thing. It's operating on the perception filter with the TARDIS users. So it must be a similar situation where at a low level it works, but if you try and stand out or, like, make yourself known, a bit weaker. So it's presumably that situation, as opposed to the Doctor having been around Martha's family.
Well, I mean, the Doctor even says it himself. It's more subtle than, like, simple mind control, because if it was that obvious, people would notice it.
Yes, exactly.
Certainly, because you have the Vivian Rook, the reporter who's actually a Torchwood agent. They would have been able to get the word out and convince more people if it was less subtle. So yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly.
I'll ask you this though: with the scene in 42 where we see Vivian, sorry, not Vivian.
The suspicious woman, who I think is what she's known as.
No.
Francine.
Yes, thank you. We see Francine sort of being manipulated to try and trap Martha. Would you say that's a little bit more believable because they're not I mean, obviously they're being really weird, suspicious for having government agents showing up and saying, "Hey, can we tap your phones?" But it's not like literal gun to the head um,
Um,
situation. Would you find that more believable, or is that still a bit shaky?
I still think that's pretty dodgy.
Hmm.
Look, and again, if I'm speaking from a situation where I don't like, mm, I don't know. I don't have children,
Hmm.
which is the biggest like asterisk that I can put on this entire
Sure.
conversation.
Sure.
I don't have children, so I don't know how
Hmm.
I would react if I was put in Francine's position. But I know it would go
Hmm.
one of two ways. It would go either I love my daughter, I'm going to trust her and not listen to what these people in suits have to say, who are not only demanding phone call, demanding I tap my phone call, but also heavily insinuating that I should vote for Saxon in this situation. Or it would go, I love my daughter, I'm paranoid about who she spends her time with, therefore
Hmm.
I'm, you know,
I'm even more
more
willing to go along.
more willing to believe that these people can help. But like I said, when it gets to the situation when there are police with machine guns in my house
Hmm.
and the government are asking for
Hmm.
my family member to come to the guns, I'm not going to be very willing.
Well, the problem
I'm
is,
pretty sure I can say that with pretty absolute
yeah,
certainty.
yeah, for,
I
for
think no
sure.
matter what, if you're a parent and you're asking your child to go to the guns, and
Not a
again,
great move.
political statement inauguration soon, but you failed.
Hmm. I mean, um, yeah, and I think the problem is, and you pointed this out before, the characterization of Francine and her relationship with Martha has been kind of shaky from the beginning, at least from um, the Lazarus experiment, because even though it makes some sense for her to be wary of the Doctor because he's sort of mysterious and trouble seems to follow him, they don't there's not a lot of reason, I think, for Francine to distrust the Doctor so much, and I really don't think there's a lot of reason for Francine to distrust Martha. Right? I mean,
No,
she's a doctor, okay? Like,
yes,
she's and a very responsible and resourceful one at that. I mean,
yeah,
she's not like a rebel, right? She's the peacemaker in the family. There's not really any indication that Francine
at,
shouldn't trust
at
Martha's
no
judgment.
at no point has Martha been characterized as having a rebellious streak in her. At no
Yeah,
point is she shown to have like a negative relationship with any single person in her family. At no
yeah,
point is she described as being someone who would intentionally go out of her way to like essentially push Francine's buttons or like
yeah,
blatantly do the opposite of what she did despite her. At no point are we
yeah.
shown any
Well,
of that. Now, I'm willing to be like, and this is an extreme generalization, but as someone who grew up with younger sisters, I'm not willing to discount the inherent possibility that Martha had a teenage rebellious streak, something like that. But we're not
hmm,
shown it, so we don't know it happened.
yeah. And even if there was that sort of context or some justification for why Francine doesn't trust
She's
Martha,
clearly
we don't
gone through
see it.
it. Yeah, and she's clearly gone through it by this point.
Yeah, like there's just not enough careful characterization.
We
And
never
it's
even learn
frustrating.
anything. We also don't
Sorry, go
even
ahead.
learn anything about Martha. Well, a key point is that before we meet the Doctor, we learn nothing about Martha's prior romantic life and her
Mm,
like people she might have brought back to Francine, who she might not have been so keen
yeah,
on, or maybe one person that Francine was very keen on that didn't work out with Martha. So now she's comparing the Doctor to that
mm,
person. We don't get any of that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's kind of frustrating. Like the relationship almost seems. I don't know if this is completely true, but it almost seems just like a plot device, which is really disappointing because you want that grounded quality of a good or at least compelling relationship between a companion and their family to sort of anchor the whole thing. Um, I mean, like the tragedies there. Certainly when the master's like, "Oh, and here they are," straight from prison. Again, there's a tragedy, but there's not enough not quite
Well,
enough
yeah,
careful characterization.
and like again, I compare it to Jackie, as I always do. In Aliens in London, Rose rocks up after a year gone from Jackie's life with the Doctor. Jackie immediately mistrusts the Doctor. Fair.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Jackie sees the inside of the TARDIS, recognizes, puts two and two together with that the situation that's happening in London, realizes the Doctor might be an alien, calls the unit helpline to report on him,
Yeah,
and then the instant that helicopters and guns show up, Jackie's like, "Oh no, Rose, she's not safe."
yeah,
Like she's immediately like, "No, what have I done to Rose?"
yeah,
Again, this situation, presumably the shady dude from Lazarus experiment must have told Francine, maybe not necessarily that he's an alien, but definitely something akin
yeah.
to that.
Something strange, something
Yeah,
off about the guy.
exactly. Yeah, and then heaps of, but then I keep going back to the whole thing with as soon as the police with machine guns rock up, and again, not pistols.
No, like jackbooted SWAT dudes with.
Yeah, you see those guys there, and they say, "Bring your daughter around."
Yeah, and even
Why the
like,
fuck would any parent go along with that?
and even if maybe you could argue there's obviously the threat of physical force again, dudes in the house with guns. There's obviously a level of fear there, but it still doesn't make a lot of sense. And even if it does, it doesn't really give a particularly consistent and certainly not a positive impression of this relationship between Francine and her daughter. Because I get that, again, guys with guns, it's just weird. It doesn't really work, and
No,
it's
it doesn't.
been. I mean, I'm sure we've pointed out a couple of other issues with the season, but this honestly, it might be one of the biggest and certainly most consistent problems, because we've even now, like, we're spending a surprising amount of time on it, but the fact is, it really does stick out. It's very,
Yeah,
very strange.
yeah. I mean, this and the Martha third wheel situation, which we'll discuss in the finale, that doesn't come up that too much in this episode.
Hmm.
There's like one line alluding to it.
Yeah, it's like, oh, yes, you ever fancy somebody and they didn't know you exist? What does that feel like, Martha?
Crazy.
Uh,
Yeah, but those are the main two issues that we've found so far
yeah,
with like long running arcs. Everything else has been incredibly solid. And again,
yeah,
we'll see how the third wheeling stuff resolves itself in the finale. In my opinion, it resolves it
sure.
in a really good way.
Mm.
But let's get back on track. The
Yeah,
Toclophane
sure.
are worth discussing for a bit.
Mm.
They're a bigger focus when we learn who they are next time. But
Yeah, they're
basically,
still
this
interesting and
yeah, I mean,
they're a
what we've got to
pretty big
work on
part.
in here, the big metal spheres with childlike voices,
And
knives, and
blades and
lasers.
lasers.
Yeah. Who appear through a big old red crack in the sky and in what is one of the most impressive visuals that we've seen from the show so far. Not necessarily graphics wise, but like creativity and all that.
Hmm.
Like the way the crack forms and stuff. It's really, really great.
Yeah. It's very creative, and when you put it together with the music, it's like, a crack in the sky opening and hell descending on the
Yeah,
earth. It's really
I'm
quite great.
I'm so sorry. I'm just going to break the fourth wall here to a
Sure.
significant degree. The Toclophane burst through the sky at 2 minutes past 8 in the morning, and we are
Hmm.
now recording. It just ticked over there at night as we're recording this. So we brought the Toclophane at exactly 2 minutes past 8, which is entirely
Hilarious.
unintentional. We didn't mean to do. Um,
Yeah, one of those little coinky dinks.
yeah,
But yeah, like they actually no. I want to talk about that sequence for a minute before we
sure. Go ahead.
expand. Um, I think I said when we did the giggle that there's a lot of similarities between this scene and the entrance of the toy maker with spice up your life.
Yes.
And I said that the toy maker scene was better. It's because it's doing very similar stuff. I
Hmm.
think that's definitely true, but I now realize, like, now that I've watched this episode again, that's, I don't know, I think maybe fairly obvious to point out. Like, the scene with the toy maker, it really looks like RTD sort of taking inspiration from himself and trying to improve on it. And I still do maintain that as a scene, like as a single sequence, the toy maker bit is better. Like it's doing everything that the scene is doing, but more intensely. That being said, this scene in this story doesn't last as long. It's not as much of a focus. It's just kind of, oh, here's the end of the world. Here come the drums, and it's over surprisingly quickly. Whereas
Yeah,
the scene with the toy maker is quite drawn out. Like it's a scene.
it doesn't. It doesn't last terribly long, but
No.
it is the direct influence for the Master's entire interpretation in this story. Um, he knew it right at the start. He asked the script editor to clear its use in the story before writing the scripts.
RTD did.
RTD did, yeah. It was incredibly pivotal, and yet, when the scripts were being written, he almost forgot to include it. Apparently,
Wow.
he almost
Good
forgot to
lord.
put it in, and then the script editor reminded him, "Hey, we paid a lot of money to use
Mhm.
it." And he went, "Oh yeah, goddamn, I'll do that, sure."
Oh dear. Yeah, it's quite the sequence. But onto the
Yeah,
Toclafane themselves.
indeed.
They
They've got the creepy ass. They've got the creepy ass child voices,
yeah, with the weirdly childlike dialogue.
the sing song cadence, and it's really
Yeah, and
creepy and
we
gross.
we like Mr. Master.
Mm.
Master's our friend. It's so weird, and there's even a bit I think where the Master says, yeah, like come on down, kids, or something like that. When the sky's opening up, and it just there's just something really uncomfortable about that. I'm not even 100% sure what, but
Yeah,
you get like, and maybe I'm saying this because I know like who the Toclafane are, but
yeah,
you get the sense that there's a tragedy there. I think, um, and that makes it all the more sort of horrifying.
yeah. I mean, there's also that we see them like before, like, putting aside the absolute carnage of the end sequence,
Hmm.
um, which is obviously like a big focus of the end of the episode, and it's something we'll talk about in a moment. But we
Mm,
see them kill the reporter and the president. Um,
mm,
the president is shot by a laser and disintegrated in less than a second.
mm.
The reporter is
Chopped to bits.
lengthily and brutally hacked into pieces by tiny knives
Yeah,
in
and
one of
they
the most comically and like cartoonishly presented gruesome deaths.
yeah. Well, that's kind of the brilliance of what I mentioned earlier with the black comedy. That also links perfectly with the Master's characterization because there is a weird bit of comedy. It's like it's almost like a Scooby Doo skit, right? Where he
Yeah,
keeps
it's
opening the
Warner
door
Brothers.
and
It's
we
Looney
hear,
Tunes. Yeah.
but it's so disturbing.
Mm,
Um, and it also just really fits in, I think, with the weird kind of stylized tone that Doctor Who's been working with. I mean, I mentioned back in, with the Ninth Doctor season that there's a lot of weird bits of comedy, but they don't work out very well. They seem kind of misplaced. Here, you can really see, I think, RTD's style and sense of black comedy
mm,
really being honed, and it's great. Um, yeah, very, very compelling stuff. And it's wonderful
yeah.
because on the face of it, you're laughing because it seems so ridiculous. But then when you are left to sort of ponder it for more than 5 seconds, it's like, oh, that was yeah, that was fucked. RTD, don't know about that, and it's just
Yeah,
great.
and we also do learn next time that the Toclafane, either through just being at the end of the world, end of time, or the process of becoming the Toclafane, have sort of generated this sick glee in like committing violent acts
Yep,
on humanity. So it fits in with their
yep.
eventual characterization.
There's almost kind of a Dalek quality how they've been
Yeah,
genetically sort of re-engineered to be like that. It's quite disturbing.
yeah, but yeah,
Um, yeah, they're quite. they're not used a lot in the story, but they're used to pretty good effect.
Yeah.
I mean, most obviously with the ending, like they're critical to the ending, but
Yes.
just generally, yeah, like even conceptually, um, there's something so uncanny about them. It's just really kind of great.
Yeah.
I also,
Yeah. Go on.
sorry, yeah, this is a separate topic, but I say that this is sort of, if this is like a political thriller, it's a bit subversive because the master, he clearly doesn't give a shit, and he's just going to do whatever he's going to do. But it's useful that there's still a relative amount of realism in the way all of these weird, for want of a better term, machinations are presented, because it would have been easy to go with a super stylized, almost 1960s Batman quality, where the master really is just running around doing wacky stuff. But I think RTD is aware enough of what this show is to know that there has to be a seriousness mixed in with the silliness, so that when you have the president getting really pissed off and showing up in the UK saying, there's calls to, oust you from your role, Prime Minister, you're being an idiot. So now I've got to come in and clean up the mess, and you're violating, Security Council protocol. That's still very useful for world building
Mhm.
because it kind of grounds the whole thing, and it's a good contrast to how batshit the master is, and how uncomfortable and dangerous the situation is. Yeah, that's just one little thing that I wanted to bring up. It's quite good.
Well, there's also the small lines that like sort of like neatly tie up potential plot holes, like uh when the master describes having sent the Torchwood gang off to the Himalayas on a wild goose chase.
Hmm.
Just to close the thread of why can't Jack call the Torchwood crew to help out,
Hmm.
um, and also using Archangel as a way of explaining why I didn't notice the presence of another Time Lord on Earth for
Why the
18
doctor
months.
didn't.
Yeah, my doctor didn't. It's a really great explanation for that. Now, of course, when we get to the Chibnall era, the 13th Doctor won't recognize the Master when he's staring her in the face until it gets pointed out eventually. So,
Was there
yeah,
ever
no,
any?
nope,
Was there any indication that he was using like a chameleon arch
nope.
situation there? Because doesn't he disguise himself as a human? Although I guess it wouldn't make a
He no,
difference, would it?
there's as far as I can remember, even in that big reveal scene, and I don't think there is no explanation as to how the Master hid from the Doctor or hid their biology from the Doctor
Hmm.
anyway. I
That's
mean,
unfortunate.
it leads for a great in isolation scene where we do get the big bombshell reveal. Like the scene
But
itself,
nothing much more than that.
yeah, it's another one of those great Chibnallisms where as soon as you put some thought into something,
Hmm.
it kind of unravels a bit.
I mean, like I think I've said before that Moffat is a very concept-heavy writer, and sometimes his concepts can run away with him. But that's a lot worse with a lot of Chibnall scenes, but especially that bit with the Master, because it's as you say, it feels like an idea that Chibnall thought of for maybe 5 minutes and thought, yeah, it's going to be a great scene, without actually putting it into context. And anyway,
Mm. Well, yeah,
that's a
like I said,
Chibnall
it's
error.
more,
We'll get to it when we get to it.
yeah. I mean, and it's mainly the little things that RTE does well with, and like we've
Yeah,
talked about a couple
sure.
of them. One little thing that I noticed in this episode is like the several news broadcasts leading up to the big Toclafane presentation at the end of the episode.
Hmm.
The British one says Prime Minister Harold Saxon has graciously offered President Winters
Hmm.
the speaking position essentially. But when it comes to the American broadcast, there's a crawl on the bottom of the screen that says um, Prime Minister Saxon embarrassed by President Winters or something to that effect. And I looked at that and went, huh, that's great. Bias in news reporting. Just a really really subtle thing RTD is to just
Hmm.
like just one little little tiny morsel of extra social commentary.
By the way, speaking of political, social commentary stuff. I looked up the character of Vivian Rook today because I've seen that actress somewhere before. I just can't think of where. If I saw her somewhere else, I'd probably think, oh, that's where. But I looked this character up, and apparently, she's not the only RTD character who's named Vivian Rook. Because in 2019, he made a political satire show called Years and Years, in which Emma Thompson plays this character Vivian Rook, who's a right-wing populist politician who rises to power, and it takes the audience, I think, from 2019 to 2036, and follows her family or something like that. I've been planning to watch it for years, but that's just funny. And I read it wasn't part of the TARDIS wiki, it was the villains wiki, but it said it's kind of ironic that this character is also named Vivian Rook because she's trying to take down a populist, a dictatorial prime minister as well, which is just, I don't know how intentional that is. It probably is, but that's just funny to me.
Yeah. Well, I think the name Vivian Rook is taken from something in particular. Oh, yeah, it's named after journalist Jean Rook. Who? Why does she get 1931 to 1991? First Lady of Fleet Street. She is also recalled for her blatant homophobia and apparent dislike of lesbians. She has been criticized for the harm she caused to the LGBT community at the end of the 1970s. Backed Thatcher in the 1975 Conservative Party leadership contest. I can see why Emma Thompson's villain character in Years and Years
is named after her. Yep.
Yeah, that's just. Okay, well, there's that.
That explains a lot.
Yep.
Oh dear.
The episode we get we get Planet Earth in its lowest point significantly across the 45 years of the show. By this point, the Doctor aged up to the point of essentially being out of action permanently. Toclafane invading, 600 million people marked for death. Cities burning within minutes of the invasion. Screams deafening the entire, like,
I'm gonna make the whole
situation.
world deaf from all of your screams. Doodle-a-doodle-a-doo. We're both fans of quality content on this show.
Yeah. It's nice that we can hum that ditty while describing one of the darkest moments in the show's run.
Yeah. Good lord. But yes, it's a very horrifying scene, and I think there are probably other like grim scenes throughout the show, but I think like for Earth specifically, it's probably the darkest for Earth up to that point in the show. I can't really. Oh, actually, you know what? No, we're actually going to see this with the next story we're going to cover.
Yes.
Anyway,
I'll tell you why. Just that one shot of the London, I think, skyline alone would have been enough to like end the episode with like you see Martha like staring at it, and then just like wow, and like end the episode there. That would have been enough for a really amazing cliffhanger. But I'll tell you what I love about this in particular. One, the like deeply melancholic soundtrack scoring it, where it's a soundtrack that just rings like we're all fucked, but we're still going to try and fight.
Yeah,
and then
there's a desperation, but almost inspiration to it, I guess.
Yeah, and then you get Martha's like defiant, like a little scared but determined delivery of "I'm coming back." Just amazing as a beat to end the story on. The Doctor's out of action. Jack is stuck on the Valiant. There's only Martha left, and she has promised us that she's going to solo this and she fucking will.
And there's also, like, there's a moment of horror because it seems like she's abandoning her family, right? Because she's got to take this teleporter and get off the Valiant, but she knows it's essentially up to her. There's no, like, there is no other help. No one's coming to save her or the rest of the world. So it's a lot of emotion in a very short space of time, and it's quite admirable that it works that way. And then I think it ends on the best part, which is when the Master gives this horrifying quasi-biblical speech about his new world, and the fact that he's got the Doctor right next to him, and the Doctor just looks broken. Even past the old man makeup, David Tennant just looks destroyed. And it's contrasted with the Master's really sadistic glee, and you think, oh yeah, we're fucked. There's something very disturbing about that, and I think you're right to point out that it was important to extend the episode just a little bit longer to really, hit those dramatic nails on the head.
Well, you say that as well, but I wonder how much of this was cut down for, because obviously I mentioned that we don't get to see the news report describing how the TARDIS crew apparently murdered the cabinet. We also don't really get to see we get Martha's tear for like a second. We don't see the Doctor telling Martha the plan, which will become a huge factor in the next episode. There was apparently a longer car chase sequence between in Martha's car, presumably running away from Saxon's government cronies, which was cut down, I think, for budgetary reasons, but also probably for time as well.
Yep.
It's a really tight 48 minutes of TV by the end of it. There's not a lot of wasted time at all.
And I think because it's probably restricted to the expectations of the time, because as much of a property as Doctor Who was back then, they still had the expectation, okay, we've got to make this 43, 45 minutes, we'll get everything done in that timeline. But it's one of the stories where, at the very least, a few extra minutes probably wouldn't have hurt. It may have even improved it, just in terms of world building and tension.
I want to, real quick on Martha. The episode doesn't give her a lot to do. It reserves that for next time. But I do like how she stands up to the Doctor. She's insistent on contacting her family. She calls him out for essentially trapping the Master on Earth, where he can wreak havoc on the people she loves. A couple of great moments of well-earned defiance.
Yeah.
Especially as she's by this point probably well and truly yeah, I'm not gonna get some. It's that's a real cross way of putting it, but I think my point stands.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Love unrequited will rob her of her rest, as Gilbert and Sullivan would probably put it.
Yeah. But it all adds up to a really, really, really great episode that it excels in the tension, it excels in heightening the stakes, it excels in the drama and the threat and the stakes.
The only real issue I can think of is that characterization of Francine, which is just a little bit odd.
And we'll find out if the finale, is this going to be a Legend of Ruby Sunday, Empire of Death situation, or is this going to be something closer to a Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways? I guess we'll find out.
We will.
But for now, I'm going to give The Sound of Drums a 9.
Yeah, same. Solid 9, for sure.
Sweet ass. Oh, and speaking of Empire of Death, I didn't exactly plan this, but it's a happy coincidence. Next time on the show, we're going to be looking at Pyramids of Mars. Where
that was not a coincidence. I planned that. because
Oh, you did plan it. Okay, great.
yeah, because I'd said we had to look at it at some point because this is the year of Empire of Death, so I thought it would be good to have it be near the end of the year or maybe beginning of next year whenever this episode gets released, or
Well,
that episode gets released.
you certainly didn't plan that I would bring up Empire of Death
No,
so
no,
close
but
to
the
this episode. No.
no, but the fact that because I thought, oh, we've had Empire of Death, so we've got to look at Pyramids of Mars sometime this year. So
Yeah.
Either way, we're still looking at it
Hell yeah.
next week, so that'll be quite exciting.
But until then, I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And
Nice commitment.
yeah, I was gonna go longer, but I needed
I
to
kind of
drink.
fucked it up because I was out of sync and gave up halfway through.
Oh, I didn't even notice you doing it.
Damn it. Anyway.